Ready to the mini session and the series Introduction to the Basic Principles of Soft Skills. In this series, we aim at giving you the necessary information you will need to prepare yourself for the full session when you enter it in the future. On the other side, we also aim at giving you some tips that you can practice before you get into the session so that you can formulate a full picture and idea about how this whole practice is all about. The topic I'll be discussing with you today is about the basic principles of effective communication. The reason we picked up this topic is because effective communication is one of the most important competencies that needs to be demonstrated by everybody in the organization. It is also one of the most important management practices that managers and supervisors, leaders should be demonstrating across the whole board of their organization. It's not only one of the most important competencies that needs to be worked out between managers and their subordinates, but also among the team members and other team members within the same organization. On the other side, we as humans, we exercise and demonstrate communication across all our lives. We communicate every second, every minute, in every instance, in every situation, with many different languages. However, the basic objective of our session today, whether it's in the organization or as human beings, is to end up with an effective communication, not just a communication. To become an effective communicator, you need to understand the whole process of communication. So I'm a sender and I have a message that I would like to send to you. It starts as an idea in my head. My brain picks up this idea, then starts an automatic process called encoding, meaning that it starts translating this idea into words, letter, whatever that I will be communicating to you. The next step in the process is my decision what is the appropriate way to communicate the message to you, whether it's verbal or whether it's written. In both cases, my brain would still continue in the encoding process to support the mode of communication I decided to use. Assuming you're the receiver of my message, your brain is doing now a reversal process. In other words, decoding the message I'm sending it and translating it into ideas and words. Now that you received a message, was it the right message I originally intended to send to you? The answer is yes and no. In the next slides, we'll be evaluating together all the factors that would support and hinder the process of communication. As we have seen in the communication process, that we could still end up in a situation where the message was undelivered. So let's reflect together on what would be the barriers to effective communication. In other words, what would be the kind of things that would prevent from receiving the message in the original format or the original idea the sender had in mind. This list includes few items of what can be the hinders and barriers to effective communication. I'm sure you can add to this list as much as you want depending on your particular situation. The illustration in this slide depicts a manager and his subordinate, and there will be a conversation. Let's follow what will happen. Is there anything that appears to you that's unusual, anything special in the manager's words? It absolutely appears to be a normal conversation, but let's see how Joe is reacting. What was going through Joe's mind? Joe appeared to be on a completely separate page. Although the manager did not say it specifically, Joe seemed to be expecting and concerned about some bad news. Surprisingly, the manager concludes the conversation with an absolute pleasant news communicated to Joe. Now let's pause for a minute. Why did Joe react this way? Also, let us reflect on a similar situation where we ourselves have been in listening to somebody and our minds reflecting on something else. Why this happens? What are the reasons that cause this? One of the very well-known facts about the human mind is that it thinks so much faster than the spoken words. Also, one of its primary functions is known as a reactive function. Our mind can deal with numerous situations in a flick of a second and can also store endless information. So we react based on these situations and based on what's stored in our memory. To link this with effective communication, let me reflect to the example we had with Joe and his manager. It seemed that Joe had experienced many negative situations with the general manager, so that when his boss mentioned the word general manager, His memory and his mind as a reactive function retrieved all those negative situations instantly into Joe's conscious. So it created like a sort of a block into Joe's mind not to listen and not to follow anything that his boss was saying except reflecting on those bad and negative experiences he have had with the general manager. So the reactive function of the brain is considered to be one of the most critical hinders in the communication process. It can make us lose important signals in any message communicated to us. The reactive function of the brain is a deficiency that both the sender and the receiver have to take into their consideration in a process of communication. This slide depicts another situation between Joe and his manager, and it seems that there is an important topic the manager is outlining to Joe. So from the manager's point of view, he's absolutely confident that at the moment, what's working well is his brain, decoding the ideas and messages he's passing to Joe, and his mouth as he's speaking, and his eyes looking into Joe because they're both looking to one another. But the question here, are you sure that Joe is listening? This is the question I'm asking the manager. Quite shocking. Joe seemed to be in a totally different planet. He was not listening at all to what his boss was talking about. In a communication process, never assume that the other person has well received the message or the idea you are communicating to him or to her. Never assume that despite the fact all the surroundings around you confirm this, you're looking to him or to her, he or she is nodding, still never make that assumption. So far in the communication process, we've seen that there is someone who's sending a message, and on the other side, there is someone who's receiving that message. The question we are raising here for discussion, was that message well received? How can we make sure that it was well received? Let's pause for a few seconds and try to reflect and think about the answer of these two questions. Actually, there are two things we can do, and I will explain each one of them in details in the next slides. The first one is feedback. The second is paraphrasing. According to Google, feedback is the process through which the receiver of the message confirms his or her understanding of what was originally communicated by the sender. It also reflects to the sender whether he or she would need to make any modification to ensure the proper understanding of the receiver. My question to you is that, how can we feedback? Let's reflect for a second and think of the answer. Asking questions proved to be the most effective tool in the feedback mechanism. It's a process that both the sender and the receiver use to ensure their understanding of the message being communicated. What are the types of questions we use in the feedback process? There are two types of questions that we mostly use, the open-ended questions and the closed-ended questions. The open-ended question is a self-explanatory type of question, meaning that you invite the other person to elaborate on his or her responses. So, for example, you ask questions like, tell me more about it, when did it happen, how did it happen, things like that. So you can keep the other person talking to make sure that he or she has already grasped the message you are communicating. For short, the open-ended questions can never be answered by yes or no, which is completely the reversal side of the closed-ended question, which you can answer by yes or no. Closed-ended questions are like the dots when you want to end a paragraph and start a new one. You use all closed-ended questions to reflect and confirm a statement. So you would say, did you understand? So if the answer was yes, then you immediately should follow with an open-ended question, saying, for example, can you summarize what did you understand? In the feedback process, we use a combination of closed-ended questions and open-ended questions. But you have to be absolutely careful when using closed-ended questions, as to never put words in the receiver's mouth. Otherwise, you will never get the confirmation or you get the idea that the other person has picked up the message you intended to send originally. Paraphrasing is the second tool we use in the communication process to ensure that the message has been received properly. Paraphrasing means that you tell the other person what did you actually understand from his or her message. In paraphrasing, you use your own words and your own expressions to reveal your understanding of the message communicated. Simply in paraphrasing, you never repeat the words being said, just use yours. In your communication process, it is recommended that you frequently paraphrase, particularly in a situation where misunderstanding or misinterpretation of words can occur. For example, talking to someone from a different culture, words can have different meanings from one culture to the other. Also, take into consideration the reactive function of the brain. If you unintentionally use words that might trigger negative reaction from the receiver. Other examples of situations where you need to do frequent paraphrasing would be being involved in a topic that involves serious financial implications or involving very high risks. In situations like this, you need to frequently paraphrase to ensure that both yourself and the receiver are both on the same wavelength and the same understanding of the topic involved, because mistakes here will never be allowed. Always remember, paraphrasing is one of your most important and most effective tools you can use in the process of communication. Whether you are a sender or a receiver, frequently use paraphrasing. In most of the cases, it will ensure the proper and accurate delivery of the message being communicated. I really like the definition of weak indicator in defining what is effective communication. Weak indicator actually wrapped the whole process into 3 segments. One is actually telling us that communication is an exchange of ideas, feelings, opinions, and we do this either verbally or non-verbally. The second part would tell us that communication is sending and receiving a message. And it's just not only sending and receiving the message, but it has to be involving making sure that the message is properly received by doing the various techniques we passed so far. And that is the third fold of the definition of weak indicator. This chart actually wraps up the whole process of communication. So there is a sender, the message, the encoding process, the decision at what is the appropriate mode to communicate the message. A receiver decodes the message and then start reflecting on what he or she had actually received. So up to this point, we're not sure whether the receiver had received the message in the original format or in the same content that actually the sender intended to send. So to properly close the loop, both the sender and the receiver should be going into a process of feedback and paraphrasing. Within the feedback, they will be using 2 types of questions, either the closed-ended questions or the open-ended questions, and also going through paraphrasing, meaning that the receiver should be repeating in his or her own words what was the sender actually saying. This process between paraphrasing, feedback, and questioning and answering questions is done simultaneously between both the sender and the receiver, so that the sender gets confirmation that what he is communicating is actually picked up properly by the receiver, and the receiver from his or her end ensures that he or she had understood properly what was the sender intending to send. In closing, I would like to personally thank you for your kind attention, and I hope that you found this session useful for you. I also hope that I was able to communicate to you the basic principles you need about effective communication, so that you can be ready for the real session when you attend it in the future. I also would like to invite you all to contact me personally should you have any questions or any issues you would like to discuss. My email will be posted at the end of the video. Also, I would like to thank you again for subscribing to our video channel so that you can receive all future videos. And I would like to wish you all the very best. See you in the next videos. Thanks. Goodbye.